but we were diagnosed very early on that we had fertility issues. And the doctor had told us that they're not certain why. So it's not specific because of my diabetes or anything like that. They can't tell us why per se, but the chances of getting pregnant naturally are like next to nil. So we had to forgo fertility treatments and an egg retrieval procedure. And so IVF that people call it, right?
Welcome to the Type 1 and Midlife podcast. My name is Melissa Slemp, a certified nutritional health coach and the founder and CEO of Abundant Health with Melissa, where I help women with type 1 diabetes to feel more empowered and live their best life despite their diagnosis. Each week, I will bring conversations and strategies from guest experts and my experience living with type 1 for over 40 years now. So if you're a woman ready to redefine how diabetes can look and feel for you, then the Type 1 and Midlife podcast is the show for you. In today's show, we get to speak with Jenni Travolo. Jenni has been living and thriving with type 1 diabetes for over 29 years now. She comes to share her ups and downs and how faith in dealing with adversity with so many tough decisions that she's faced, and come hear the story and the happy ending with that, and her 4 pillars of health that have helped her thrive with type 1 diabetes. Come on in. Just a reminder that nothing you hear on this Type 1 and Midlife podcast should be a substitute for professional medical advice. Please always consult your medical professional before changing your diet, insulin dosages, or healthcare plan. Well, welcome, Jenni. We are so happy to have you here. I am excited to be able to spend a little time with you and to welcome you and to learn more about your story, your life with diabetes, and that we can help each other, and to feel more inspired by what you have to share with us today. And I did already share a little bit in the introduction before we jumped on here about your life. You're a busy mom, wife, you have a career alongside managing this second job is what I like to call it, which is type 1 diabetes. So if you could just say hello and share a little bit about you, a little bit more maybe, and share about your diagnosis story. And we can't wait to hear.
Yeah, well, hey, Melissa, and definitely thank you for inviting me to be a part of your podcast. I've put it out there, all transparent. I've never done this before, but looking forward to the next short bit of having a conversation with you and talking about type 1 diabetes and my life with it. And just like you had mentioned, I'm a older mother, with 2 young kids, 3 and 5 years old. And I do work full time as a CPA and love what I do. But my journey with diabetes started 29 years ago. And it's funny, as long as that was almost 3 decades ago, but those days, as long as they seem so vivid. And I'm sure your days as well for you.
Yes.
Congratulations on you were 42 years?
41. And
41.
And you and I do share, we were both teenagers diagnosed. I was 14, you were 13,
just turning 13. Yeah.
So we have a lot in common with that as well. I used to be in the business world too. So I work for CPA. So we have a lot in common.
There you go.
So I understand that corporate sort of feel, but yeah, and that's something we can talk further on. So what was your diagnosis? Yeah. What are your memories about that time?
So I remember really vividly, it was like right after Christmas, and I was in I want to say it was grade 7. And I was a part of the senior girls basketball team. And I've always been active my entire life. And basketball was one of those things. I wouldn't say I was the best player on the team, but I was probably one of the better ones. And so they were really looking forward to me playing on the team. And it was literally the night before our competition for the finals within our city. I had woken up with a terrible, terrible gastro flu of some sort. Mm. And I was so sick that I had to call in sick to school and wasn't able to make the tournament. And ever since that day, which was in January of 94, slowly but surely, all the symptoms started to arise. I was starting to get excessively thirsty. I was bringing gallons and gallons of, juice and water and anything I could get my hands on to drink. And it was just very unusual. But, being 12, 13 years old, you don't really think too much about it. Mm-hmm. And just my skin started getting really dry, and my tongue was getting really dry. And funny enough, my mom was a registered nurse as well. And she'll even say to this day, like, she knows all about diabetes, but when it's your own child, like, you almost maybe want to go in denial a little bit about what the symptoms are. And you really don't put much, like, you put thought into it, but you're just dealing. I'm one of, at the time, was four kids. And I guess my youngest brother wasn't born then, but she was busy mom running a household. And just about 3-4 weeks of this continued happening. And I was an average sized kid, but I had lost probably 15, 20 pounds very, very quickly. Mm. So I knew something was up, and my mom made an appointment with a family doctor, and they tested my blood sugar right in the office. And then they also sent me for some blood work. And I don't know if I've actually told this story to anyone, even to my parents, on what was truly going on in my mind when the call came in. But it was a weekday, and of all things, you'll find this actually funny as a diabetic. The dinner my mom had made that evening was spaghetti. Huge plate of spaghetti with all the sauce and all the meatballs. And, as a diabetic, you see that on a plate and you freak out a little bit, right? It's like, oh, too many carbs, I can't eat it. Or,
true.
within portion control, right? But we were sitting at the table and my dad wasn't home yet. And my brother and I were sitting at the table eating, and my mom was upstairs, and the phone rings. Landline, no cell phones back then. And all I remember hearing is my mom screaming, getting very, very upset, and slammed down the phone. And the first thing I thought of was, is my dad okay? That's the first memory that came to my mind, because why she was so upset in her voice that I could tell that something was horribly wrong. And so I was like worried, like something happened about my dad at work, because he works in a dangerous mill environment. And I didn't know what happened. So I ran upstairs, and she was just a sobbing mess, and she couldn't relate what had happened at the time. And so she came back down later, and she said, the hospital had phoned and the doctor and confirmed that you have diabetes. And I didn't know what that meant. And I just remember because she was so upset, it made me feel upset. And just talking about, I knew diabetes meant something about what we were eating and sugar volume. And I thought, maybe did I eat too much sugar to cause this on myself? And I even specifically remember thinking, and I asked her, I said, can I eat this? Like, what's in front of me? And there goes the rest of my life since then, right? Can I eat this?
That's so interesting.
Just
and,
that relation.
Yeah. And, if you don't mind me jumping in, because you had mentioned that your mom was a nurse. And it sounds like, to me, because her reaction, because we all react so much different to hearing that news, but she knew instantly what that impact was, and that it does kind of illustrate, how that feeling was within the house and her, and, her. That's amazing. Yeah.
Yeah, I guess that's true. And I never really thought about that way as well, because being an RN, she worked for a company at the time where she would, once people were released out of the hospital, she would go touch base with them. And there'd be people that weren't in critical care, but they needed someone to come help with their wounds, medications and whatnot. And, any any nurse has seen the bad side of diabetes, and that can happen. And I'm sure thoughts in her mind where here's my daughter, 12, 13 years old, and now this is going to become a part of her life. Not meaning those negative things per se, but that the potential is possibly there. So I'm certain I would have reacted the same way, knowing now what she knows. And you feel like, as a mother myself now, I feel being in those shoes on how would I react. So it just brings a different light to the whole circumstance.
It sure does, a perspective of it. So fast forward, and we'll definitely talk more about more of the details of your day-to-day with diabetes, but what's that relationship now? You're 29 years now managing type 1. So what's happened with, obviously you're still, there's still a relationship there, I'm sure, but that acceptance, how long did it take when you were going through your teenage years for things to kind of find their groove as far as what your routine was going to be managing?
I think from my personal experience, with my mom being a nurse and with the support, especially being here in Canada, we have a really good, there'll be some people that will, argue with me, but from what my experience is, the healthcare system is quite good. And the resources that I did have at the time for juvenile diabetes and being initially diagnosed were really, really good. So with that said, I'm like a type A type person. I always have been. Let's follow the rules. My mom was on board with me, keeping track of everything and monitoring really well, to the point that initially my A1Cs were so good that the doctor said I need to lighten up in the fear of hitting those lows and not being able to feel them. Yeah. And especially with no CGMs at the time too. So I can understand that.
Yeah.
But I would say with the whole diet culture and being in your teens, there was kind of this mixed time period for me where, I wanted to slim down a little bit and get active, and all those things, which kind of morphed into something else, which we can always talk about on a different podcast. But I would say probably late teens to mid to late 20s. So probably a good 6 to 8 years for sure. Fortunately, I would say for myself, I was never in denial of diabetes. I knew that it was real. I'm a practical person. Never did I once not take my insulin, but there was a period in time where I would go by how I felt. I don't want to prick my finger 4 times a day. I feel fine. I'm just going to take my insulin. I'm not hitting a low. I'm not excessively thirsty. Therefore, I am fine. And it was, a time where maybe I was a little bit in denial there, where I just wanted to live a normal life. And even back in my 20s, I was told by my endocrinologist, you are a perfect candidate for the insulin pump. You're so insulin sensitive. And anything little that you do, you're hitting lows. And I just wasn't ready. It was being attached to a device that I just wasn't ready to commit. And I'd rather not wear anything on me, take my insulin discreetly. Actually, a lot of people that I knew back in the day, they didn't even know that I was diabetic, because I'm in control. I can do it myself. You don't need to know. I'm fine, and not that I was shameful of it, but I just felt that I could do it all on my own. So
I can totally relate to that. And just the way you described it, kind of, it described my teenage years too. I tended to it. I didn't deny it, but I downplayed it. Right? If we almost put it in our back pocket. At least that's what I did. I didn't draw attention to it. I was very independent. So that sounds a lot like, just the way that you were kind of managing it too. And of course, we didn't have social media back then. We didn't have all this information. It wasn't a talked about disease. At least, I was diagnosed at 82. You were about 10 years later. So it was just a different time. the awareness wasn't there. So I think that probably had a lot to do with it as well.
And also too, I don't know about you, but myself, I I don't, unless it's a significant other like my husband or family member that truly might understand, I, I feel I don't want to necessarily, at least back in the day, have to explain everything because they don't get it. So
Yeah.
there's really not much of a benefit. Even just something came up last week at work, and long story short, I was sick. I caught a gastro bug from my 3-year-old, and as you know, that can elevate the cortisol in your body and your blood sugars. And I was at work and I was fighting a high blood sugar, and I didn't know what else to do other than starting to rage bolus, that I jumped on the treadmill at work. And they asked me, they said, "Why don't you drink some juice? Can't that help?" I was like, "Oh my goodness, no, it's the exact opposite." So I had to explain the whole thing. And I do that lovingly now, just for information purposes. But I feel back in the day, like, no, I don't need to get into those conversations. So I just felt it just wasn't worth it.
Yeah, that's so interesting. I know we all have similar stories just like that. Yeah, we can be patient. We can try to help and educate, right? Because it really is about lack of understanding. People they put together diabetes and sugar. So if they know you have diabetes, they just think we need sugar, right? Not understanding the whole circumstances. So yeah, that is a very relatable story there. So tell me about, I know you're a mom, you've got young kids, 3 and 5. So what was pregnancy like for you? And did you have any specific, and I can say this for myself as well, because I know pregnancy, we were considered high risk. I had my daughter 27 years ago. So it was less, the care was not like it is today. We didn't have CGMs when I was pregnant. How about that? Went through it with a lot of finger sticks. So what was the care like for you?
Well, this is kind of like opening a can of worms, but I'm not afraid to share my story. And on my Facebook wall, you can find a post of the scare that I did go through with my firstborn child. But pregnancy was not good. Let's just say, when I was in my early 20s, I was previously married, and that relationship ended just before I turned 30. We chose not to have children for a different variety of reasons. But my husband, now Barry, we met later in life, and everything happens for a reason, happens, in God's timing, and in my opinion. And so we met a little bit later than in life. And so he's 7 years older than myself. And we got married, I believe I was 34. And we got together, we met, and we discussed right away what our future goals and life and ambitions and children, what that would look like. And our goals had really aligned, and having a family, specifically 2 children, was like important to us. We felt that was what we had wanted, and we wanted it sooner than later. So we actually met in July of 2014, and we got married the following June in 2015. And right after that, we're like, okay, we want to start a family, because that was important to us. And sure enough, this might be new to some people that follow me on Instagram, but so be it. This is reality. But we were diagnosed very early on that we had fertility issues. And the doctor had told us that they're not certain why. So it's not specific because of my diabetes or anything like that. They can't tell us why per se, but the chances of getting pregnant naturally are like next to nil. So we had to forgo fertility treatments, and an egg retrieval procedure. And so IVF, that people call it, right? Mm-hmm. And as the story progresses, I had mentioned that we had both wanted a family of 2 children in our perfect little world, right? And I'm praying to God. We all are, my family, my mom especially. After months had gone through, we had gone through the transfer and the fertility treatments. Sure enough, guess how many embryos we got at the end of the day? Mm. We got 2.
Oh, wow. Wow.
So, if this wasn't God's hand at play the whole time, that is my understanding of how I believe that it all to have occurred. But so sure enough, I get transferred the first embryo, and that's my now daughter, Gabby. So she's turning 6 this December, and the pregnancy went really, really well till about 18 weeks. I was just feeling fantastic. The glow was on there. Even the doctors were commenting on me, like, you look fabulous. I was working out. My blood sugars were in really good range. And sure enough, about at the 19th, 20th mark, my blood pressure started to go up. And I got, unfortunately, diagnosed very quickly with early onset preeclampsia. If you look up the risk factors for what might cause early onset preeclampsia, is being around, like, your first pregnancy, being around the age of 35, diabetic, and IVF. All those check box.
Wow.
I fit them all. Yeah. So it's really hard as to why, but it was a really, really scary experience. To the point where I had to deliver at just a little over 31 weeks. The fluid had creeped up all the way into my lungs at this point, where I could barely breathe. The doctor said, if we don't take her out now, both of you might not make it. So it was a very life and death situation. I tried my best with my blood sugars, but there was nothing I could do. And again, here's another circumstance where I was completely out of control of my own body, and diabetes kind of went to the wayside. Like, I did the best, but this was like consuming my entire life. Right. And so she was born at 31 weeks. She was 3 pounds, 6 ounces. And she's been a fighter since day one. She was intubated for a few days, and God had his hand on her and my life. And she is living, thriving. You would never know. She is the smartest girl now. So she is a December baby, and she should be in JK this year, but because she was born 2 months early, she's actually an SK. And the teacher has even commented saying she's one of the brightest in her class and whatnot. So huge blessing, huge miracle. Every child, every baby is a miracle on this earth, but the fact that she is living and thriving with no issues.
That's amazing.
Such a huge, huge blessing.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. That is beautiful. Yeah. And, just to hear your journey, because we go through a pregnancy as women with type 1, and then, we already have these variables that we know that we're going to have to face, but then you're handed something that's much deeper, much more serious. And then your faith, which I just commend, because it really is about our strength with God. I think that really helps us. Without leaning on Him, I don't know how we would get through circumstances like that. So thanks for sharing. Appreciate it.
Well, and just to add to that story, can you hear me? Oh, there we go. Yeah. Sorry. Yeah. So that was embryo number 1 of 2. To further, since this was an elective procedure, not getting pregnant naturally, quote unquote, in storage, we had a second embryo. So now here comes the life. We're playing with life a little bit here, right? Here we have an embryo, which in my opinion is a child already there that just needs to grow. And me and my husband both wanted a family of 2 kids. Here's this child that's already there. But now the specialists had said, in no way, shape, or form on the 4 pillars of health are we electing for you to go through another pregnancy. They said, we can maybe ship you and the embryo down somewhere else to some other state in the US that might take your case, and it might, but you take that risk on yourself, but we will not allow you to go through this based on your experience. And I'm like, oh my goodness, what do we do? In the pit of my stomach, I'd question it. I'm like, well, maybe I can call up other places in the US and see if they'd be willing to do this. But in the pit of my stomach, I knew that I knew something, that I could not go through this for the sake of my daughter that was already born and my husband and my family. I just could not jeopardize my health any further. And so we had this second life frozen in Toronto, Ontario. And what do we do? So long story short, my husband and I discussed it to great lengths with all the medical staff, and we came to the conclusion, and we were fortunate enough to have found a local surrogate in town to carry our second child. And you can transfer an embryo to someone, whether it's yourself or another person. The chance of that baby being born viable is 1 in 3. But I knew deep down God had placed this desire in both of our hearts to have a family of 2 children. And I knew that this, without ever even having to go through any of this, I knew that there was life in that second embryo.
Yeah.
And she was born November 2019, and living and thriving. And her and her sister are just BFFs. It just brings such great joy watching them play and knowing that they were truly a miracle and here for a purpose. So I'm really excited to see who they'll become as they grow up, and tell their true stories to them when they're ready to hear.
Yes. Oh, wow. I love that. And talk about hope, right? I'm going to be throwing hope around a lot in this Type 1 and Midlife podcast. So there's a true example of it. So thank you so much. That was beautiful. Wow.
Yeah, like I was in the midst of despair. I could have gone negatively and spiraled down, but I always knew there was hope. If there's a chance of a different circumstance, something positive, I'm going to go for it. Like another saying that my mom always said, she'll definitely listen to this, but as a young child, she'd always say, try your very, very best and Jesus will do the rest. And I've always taken that to heart, right?
Absolutely.
You give it your go. And if something is truly meant to be, it'll be. And if it's not, there's reasons why. Right. And I take that to heart for sure.
Yeah. Thanks again. I love that. So what, you're obviously hope filled. So how is that managed to continue with your day-to-day with diabetes? And now are you on a insulin pump? Do you do MDI? Can you tell us a little bit about what your insulin therapy is and your routine?
Yeah, so I really resonate to one of your posts the other day where you said, well, if it ain't broke, why fix it, right? And that's a mentality that I had. I was on MDI, so multiple daily injections, for, I would say, 27 of my 29 years, because I felt that it was not broke. But yet, as I had mentioned previously, my endocrinologist had said, you're the perfect candidate for an insulin pump. And me and him had kind of parted ways for some time because he was just a challenging individual as a medical doctor, in my opinion, at my point in life, in my 20s. So I had gone to see another doctor, but yet then I go to that doctor and they say, you're the perfect candidate for a pump. And So sure enough, it was about 2 years ago now. Um, I was just really suffering from a lot of low blood sugars, especially from nighttime. So I had the Freestyle Libre because that was covered through insurance. And finally, a few months later, my insurance company had added the Dexcom G6 to the mix, which I was really hoping for to get the alarms, right? That was all what we as diabetics had really wanted, is having those alarms set to notify us, especially when we're going low.
Especially at night, right?
And
The
especially
night
at night.
Yeah, totally
Because there have been
understand.
times, I'm sure like yourself, you'd wake up in a panic and a sweat and what is going on? And you're too tired to even test, but to actually have your phone alert you that something is going on. And even better yet, have a family member like your spouse being notified as well on their phone. So that was the most revolutionary piece of diabetic equipment that they've created. I'm so forever grateful for that device. But with that said, I wasn't managing my lows as well. I would have sometimes 2 or 3 lows at a time. I'm very, like, my A1C has always been quite good, but yet my lows were, I would hit several a week to the point where I went on the juvenile pen. So I would be dosing half units. And even still, I try to be as regimented as I could with all of my meals. I was bolusing as best as I could and activity, but I was still always hitting those lows because I'm very highly insulin sensitive, just from being so active, right? So I bit the bullet and I said, you know what? There's a 90-day return policy on this pump. I'm just going to do it. So about 2 years ago, I switched over to the Tandem X2, and my nurses laugh at me to this day. And I said, I don't know about this thing. I might hate it. I'm going to return it back in the box it came from. And honestly, it was the best decision in my life. I've had so much better control, and it's like a little pancreas working on its own. I have the Dexcom G6 working with Control IQ with this pump, and they talked with each other, and it'll decrease my basal if it senses that I'm dropping, or it'll increase it when I go up. Like, it's fantastic. I could spend hours and hours talking about that combo, but I'm just so fortunate that I have access to these technologies because not everyone does, right? So I feel really,
right. Yeah.
I feel so grateful that I had the opportunity to take advantage of that. And I actually did bite the bullet and actually decide that I was willing to change, because change is scary, right? Especially as a diabetic, right?
Yeah, I totally get it. Now, to be continued whether or not I ever get on a pump, but we'll see.
Yeah.
But I continue, and it's not that I'm anti-pump, but it's a lot of what you just said too. It's just you get in a habit with your routine and what works. Not saying a pump wouldn't work for me, and I'm sure it would. So yeah, to be continued on that. When and if that happens for me. But it sure is nice to have options and, just to have other ways to manage and, to take what we need with insulin. So when you were mentioning insulin sensitivity, and it struck me too, because I know fitness is a big part of your life and your routine. So share how fitness is in your life, in your routine. And I'm a big advocate too, because it's definitely a driver for better insulin sensitivity, which is what we all want. Type 1, type 2, anybody living on this planet needs to have sensitive, a body that is sensitive to the insulin that it's either producing or that we're injecting. So tell me about your fitness routine.
Yeah. So with my mom being an RN, we've just naturally been more of an active family. And that's how I grew up. So it's always been a part of me. For example, we lived kind of semi-rural at the time. So my mom and I, and sometimes my younger brother, we would go for a walk and my dad would come pick us up. And the goal would be, how far can we get this time before he comes to pick us up? So it was always like walking down the road and how fast could we go, fast forward into my teen life. I got into running and rollerblading, which I really loved. So always personal, I'm more of a personal sports type of person. And I think diabetes could have played with it as well. I felt I didn't want to compete with others that weren't dealing necessarily with type 1 because it affects your energy level. If you're having a low, and I don't want to be critiqued on my effort levels when I have other factors going on in behind me. So I've always been a lone wolf, I want to say, when it comes to fitness and being active. Not to say that I don't mind playing tennis with someone, it's not that, but the more competitive side of things. But when I got into my university years, that was the years that I figured, I'm not doing these ad hoc activities at home anymore. My life's a little bit more regimented with schooling and very busy with that. So I needed to dedicate some time, especially knowing as a diabetic that movement is medicine. It truly is. Mm-hmm. And especially those years when, I wasn't necessarily as, taking my blood sugar as frequently as I really should have. I knew that at least, being active would help in that regard. So I had joined the gym back in university. And since then, I really have been a member of the gym. And I've noticed, just being active, just those peaks in particular on what you eat. It just, if you work out for half an hour a day, an hour a day, and I'm sure you can relate to, you will see the ripple effects like hours later.
Yeah, absolutely.
Versus if you take that a few days off, those highs will go a little bit higher. And mm-hmm. it really, your body is always kind of burning at a higher capacity, I would like to say. And it really does help with the blood sugar control.
Yeah, it really does. I could not repeat what you just said or top what you just said, because I totally agree. It has been a game changer for myself as well. And you probably noticed the days, because I know, you work as a CPA, so you might be sitting,
yeah.
especially, during tax season, which is the kind of the talk that we have here in the States, this time of year. But what a difference it makes on the days that we don't plan it or we don't factor it in. We just naturally will need more insulin. And sometimes you can adjust it with, with what we're eating. But just like you say, it maximizes insulin on board no matter what. And it gives you a little bit more freedom, I think, with food and, maybe a little bit more carbohydrates or whatever. So how does your diet and your exercise habits, how does that balance out and coordinate for you? Would you say you have a routine every day?
Yeah. So currently speaking, like I mentioned before, I'm very type A from my perspective as a diabetic for 29 years. We all know the variables that affect our blood sugars, right? Mm-hmm. There's diet, exercise, stress, routine, even the timeliness of when we do certain things. And because I'm really trying to hone in, getting my time in range with my glucose levels as tightly knit as possible. That's kind of my goal that I've had for the last few years since being on the pump, is the more that I can control and be more consistent and static day over day, I feel in my body and my mind, I'm winning, I'm ahead of the game. So when it comes to diet, I'm fairly consistent on, call me boring, but there's those handful of meals that I like what I eat, but I don't need a whole lot of variability. So especially being into fitness, I do, and diabetic as well, I really do appreciate and understand the importance of lean protein in a diet. When it comes to muscle atrophy, that's definitely, you need that protein in your life, and especially for helping to feel fuller longer. Mm-hmm. And when it comes to weight management as well, and with the blood sugars as well. So you're not going to be spiking as much, right? So I tend to have my diet consumes mainly of a protein 3 times a day, plus with a snack. I would say not quite low carbohydrate, but moderate. So moderate to low. My dietitian did say, someone of my age and stature, I should aim for a minimum of at least 100 grams of carb per day. So I take her advice to heart. So I'm usually around that point. So the rest I'll fill with veggies and fruit and whatnot. And from an activity standpoint, ever since my children were born, I do work full time as a CPA, and my kids are young. My husband goes to work very early in the morning, but fitness is an absolute must for me. So the best way that I was able to do it, so I was at the gym for almost 2 decades, but especially with COVID hitting, young kids, a friend had invited me to join this online fitness app. And I thought I would hate it, to be honest, because I had done the gym life for a very long time. I even had a gym partner as well that we would work out together. And I was leaving a lot of that behind. But I just thought, for the sake of my diabetes, it was very important for my health to keep on moving. I switched up to online fitness and following specific programming. And with that came a whole community of women that I got to meet and interact with. So I didn't feel alone anymore, and like-minded moms that were very encouraging. And that's where I'm currently at this day now. And when it comes to fitness, diabetes, nutrition, consistency is everything. If it doesn't mean perfection at all. And same with diabetes, there's no such thing as perfection, and perfection is impossible. And that coming from me, who always strived for those perfect grades in school, it's just something that's very unrealistic, right? It's just more about consistency, right? So the more consistency you are day in, day out, you can have those little blips and flops in between, but it's like, what are you doing most of the time is what you will be at the end of the day, I guess, so to speak.
Yeah. I love that. And balance, and that's one of my key words, right? And it's balanced plate, it's balanced routine, balanced blood sugar. I think balanced blood sugar is a little softer than control. I used to use the word blood sugar control a lot more, like within myself and, just self-talk. But I'm realizing, there is no controlling it. We do the best we can with the variables, like you were talking about, and we adjust as needed, right? So it's just so nice. Your lifestyle points to that. So it's really good. Yeah, consistency is where it's at with type 1. Call it boring, right? But boring feels good, right? I'm the same way. That's right. If it feels good, keep doing it. Yeah, definitely.
Absolutely.
Nice. Well, this has been an amazing time, and I definitely would love to invite you back another time, because there are some other things that we could definitely have dove into and kind of unpacked a little bit more. And so when you, could you share one, in 29 years that you've had, just figuring it out on your own, what, if someone was newly diagnosed, or somebody like yourself that's, a diabetic warrior, I love that term. What piece of advice would you have to give them encouragement?
For me, I want to speak to that type 1 diabetic mom that works. We wear many hats as a mother. And when you're dealing with a disease 24/7, there's no holidays. And just a really short story, just before I get to what my advice is. I remember when my youngest daughter was 6 months old, and she was in my hands, and she was one of those babies that you had to hold 24 hours a day. Honestly, you could not put her down or she'd cry. And I was trying to have my lunch because my blood sugar was dropping and everything was beeping on me. And it was like a eureka moment. And if you really take this case to point, what is the what is the better choice in this particular moment? Hold my child who just needs the attention because she's crying, or dealing with my low blood sugar? Like, if you had to pick A or B for your survival, which is more important? And it's absolutely, you have to deal with your low, or you're going to be good to no one. And just that very clear, concise example is a perfect and relatable situation, I think, that we can take to heart as a mother, whether you're diabetic or not. And I'm actually a fitness coach in my online community. I loved it so much when I joined as a member a few years back, that I love encouraging other women. I actually do have a few diabetics on my team too, which is great.
Oh,
But just providing that,
nice.
yeah, just providing that hope, that motivation to get going. And what I like to say to any diabetic mom or even a non-diabetic is, find any way, and it's just not hoping, but actually find some time for yourself to prioritize that you are important as a mom, as a human being, that you need to fill your own cup first before we can serve those that need us and love us, whether it be our children, our spouse, our parents, siblings, and even our employers, where if we don't take care of ourselves first, especially as a type 1 diabetic, that's absolutely crucial. So with that, movement is medicine. Whether you're needing a physical transformation is kind of a sidebar, but if you get moving, even just for half an hour a day, just that mental release of happy hormones in your bodies just does wonders. I wake up first thing in the morning before the kids do, and I just feel like so much more brighter, more energetic, like I can tackle the day regardless of what's going on. So to those moms, really do carve out some time for yourself, whether it's exercising, journaling, doing personal development, walking. It's not selfish to ask for that, half an hour for yourself. It's just being selfless, because you'll be a better mom, a better spouse, a better friend to those around you, rather than just constantly giving, because you can't pour from an empty cup, right? Like they say. So
absolutely. Yeah. Some great examples. Thanks for sharing that story about holding your daughter. It's so vivid what you share, because we can picture that, but you're true. Yeah. It definitely starts with us. And women, we do tend to be givers, nurturers naturally, always wanting to do with what's around us and helping with who's around us and what's going on. But yeah, I appreciate that. That is really good advice for all women.
Yeah. And, I know we're all that, well, most of us are like that as moms, but just think of it from, 10,000 feet. If you can empower yourself that much more, you can then give that much more to those around you. So, a little goes a long way. And, you don't need to spend 2 hours in the gym. That's not what it's about, but just finding some women in your life that maybe can help you start off that journey. And that's what I'm here to. I have a lot of friends in my community as well. And just being that encouragement, being truthful and transparent, what's going on in your life, and finding that friend that can help encourage you and go through the hard times, and just, get moving and doing something for you.
Yeah, that's awesome. Thank you so much. My goodness, you have got words of wisdom. You and I could talk forever.
Well,
I've learned so much about you, and this has been a very special conversation, and I'm so glad that we were able to share it with some other women that are going to tune in and listen. And what is, as far as hope, because you've just given us some amazing examples of how hope and believing in yourself and all of that is, but it's obviously something you're living and you're demonstrating and you're sharing inside your fitness community. So it sounds like you've got it going on already. And I was going to ask you what inspires you to keep going with diabetes. And, is there anything specific that you're hoping for? That word hope just keeps coming up. But is there something that you're looking towards when it comes to maybe tools or different insulin devices, or I always call them tools because they're, the things that we use to kind of take care of our diabetes. But is there anything that you can think of that maybe that would even better serve us? Have you ever thought about that?
Oh boy, that's a loaded question.
It
I was
really is, yeah.
hoping and dreaming for that CGM. And ultimately, I know we all in the back of our minds, we hope for a cure, but in our lifetime, that would be ideal, of course, but to be realistic, I'm not sure if that'll ever come our way. And with that comes consequences too, right? You just never know. So with that said, any tool that it's that acceptance that diabetes is here to stay. It's here for me. And once you kind of come to grips with that, it takes some people, and it took me years to, fully hone on that and realize, okay, I need to take good care of myself today because I want to be here and it's that hope that drives me. I want to be here and I want to be healthy for when my children get older, when they get married and have children. I want that hope, and that hope that I get is from taking care of myself, whether that's physically, mentally, emotionally, spiritually, all of the above. So any tool that helps me get there, the closed loop system, I'm telling you, I can talk to you offline about going on the pump, but
you might convince me. You never know. Never say never.
They're further coming up with the tools and even becoming even more smart with the programming in place with the control IQ. That's the programming that speaks between the Dexcom and the pump to say when to slow things down, when to speed it up. But then every body is different, right? So I've learned over the years how to manage, like, for example, when I work out, I pull my pump off completely about half an hour prior to, because I'm so sensitive. I need no insulin on board to do my workouts. But
understood. Awesome.
Any tool that would help us.
Yeah. We're pretty grateful, aren't we? Yeah. We, when we can think back of the day when we were diagnosed 30, 40 years ago. And we're just there's so much now that helps living with diabetes much more easier and more manageable. And and that's like you said too, just having access to it too. So, and not only do we have the tools, but we have access to it. So completely.
And I had
grateful.
to laugh just on a side note. I remember one of your posts, and it was a vivid memory for me too. Remember being in the hospital, and we all first started to practice on the orange. With a super long syringe. And I remember going 1, 2, 3, no, again, 1.
Practicing
just
those
days came back. And just even the length of the needles when they became shorter, then to the pen. Like, it's been interesting to see the whole evolution of where it's come to this day. So unfortunately for those parents and children that become type 1 diabetic now, but my goodness, do they have so many great tools that they can utilize for sure. So
totally agree. Yeah. Again, this is a great conversation, and we will continue it. I would love to invite you back another time to talk to our listeners. So share, Jenni, how can the listeners find you? What's the best way to contact you?
So I'm always an open book. I find that from my experiences, if anything, if someone else can learn or maybe gain some insight from their own life, from what I've learned, I love to chat, whether it's about fitness, diabetes, being a young mom, what have you. You can easily find me. I'm an open profile on Facebook. So it's Jenni, Jenni, last name Travolo, Trav as in Victor, OLO. And also I'm on Instagram. So I am, like I say, I work full time, but on the side, I do have my own online fitness community called Ignite Fitness. And there's a larger and continually growing group of people that, busy parents, some men as well, as part of the community, and that just value fitness and wanting to have it as part of their life, and still being there for their family, and being able to, hit pause on a workout because their child needs something and then go and resume it. And so you can find me on Instagram as well. And I post a lot of my workouts, motivational things and stuff about type 1 diabetes as well. You can find me at Jenni Travolo, all one word in small letters, on Instagram.
Yeah. And we will link all that here in the show notes. So easy ways to stay in touch with Jenni. So once again, thank you so much for being here and sharing your story and your wisdom with our listeners.
Yeah, it was a pleasure chatting with you. And anytime, I'm open to chatting again. And when I first saw your profile, you just get that gut sense that, like, you can really, you have something there, like a connection and some similarities. So I'm really appreciative for this opportunity. And thank you for having me talk today.
Oh, I totally agree. And thank you, Jenni, once again. And we will see you soon. Thank you for listening to the Type 1 and Midlife podcast. Head over to iTunes to subscribe, rate, and leave a review. It's very much appreciated. Thank you. And be sure to check us out at abundanthealthwithmelissa.com for our free resources. See you next week.